In this section, we'll go over the user interface of the desktop editor when you are in the world. Let's begin with the primary tools. There's a variety of primary tools in the in-game editor that you should be familiar with. The first thing that you should be familiar with is the main menu, which is located in the top left and represented by the hamburger or triple dashed lines icon. When you click on it, there are several options that you've got access to. One is Return to Creation Home, which brings you back to your home page with all your worlds. 2 is the ability to shut down the current server instance. Note that if you're collaborating with other people, this will also shut down the active instance for them, so be mindful when using this. Next, we've got View Application Logs, which will open the folder where the desktop editor logs are located. 4th is Launch the TypeScript editor, which by default will be VS Code unless you explicitly state it to be something else. 5th, I should say, is the ability to publish your world. If we click on that, we get a lot of options regarding publishing worlds, but we'll go over that in another section. Then we've got the ability to rename the world, save a custom backup, where we can provide the title for the backup and the description. Upon saving our backup, there we go, we can go into backups, and we can see that our backup has been created. We also see the automatic snapshots that Horizon will create for us, and we are able to not only modify the title of a backup and its description, but also restore our world to this backup. It's worth mentioning that this feature is handy in case you accidentally do something you didn't intend to. However, it's also good to create copies of your world just in case at major milestones. After backups, we can export the world's geometry into a format that other 3D applications support, such as Blender or Maya. We can also look at the world capacity. We can see that obviously it's an empty world. There is barely any capacity. But do note that the more players you have, the higher load they have on the simulation animation. Then, after this, we've got keyboard shortcuts, which opens up all of the keyboard shortcuts for the editor. At the moment, you can't customize them, but I'm hoping this is something that can be added to in the future. After the keyboard shortcuts, we're in player settings, which is a very interesting window. In part, player settings can also be referred to as the world settings because they affect how players interact within the world. So the first option here is the voice over IP settings, which is how people hear each other in this world. So global is the default, which means no matter where you are in the world, players will be able to hear each other. Local is obviously if you have to stand next to other players for them to be able to hear you. Next is the maximum player count for your world. Now you can obviously change this all the way up to 32 players, but as you can imagine, the more players you have in your world, the more load it takes on the world itself. And the minimum you can have is 1. So let's set it to 4 for now. The suggested minimum player count appears when your world is published, and it helps Horizon match the right amount of people to travel to the world. So it will attempt to fill out the world until it reaches a suggested minimum. Emotes is something you can do both in VR and on the web, but you can also disable them. A lot of emotes also have audio. Once again, you can disable emote audio if you don't want to have that in your world. Next, we've got can hands collide with physical objects? I think that one is self-explanatory. If you have physical objects such as walls or movable crates in your world, you can toggle the setting to disable hand interactions in VR, and more important, collisions, I should say, in VR. Another one is can hands collide with static objects. So by static means they will not move in no way, shape, or form. Once the world starts, they will just be there in place, and that's it. So yeah, you can set that to true, but again, it's off by default, and I recommend leaving it off unless you explicitly need this functionality. Custom player movement is a really interesting one. We will go over this in another section, but it allows you, as it states here, the ability to move the player or set their position, speed, jump height, all those extra attributes that you might want to have on the player. Custom name tag visibility is a good one for games that have cooperative elements or versus elements. Gives you the ability to hide player name tags. Generate instant replays, as it describes here. It enables scripts that record players when they take certain actions or reach certain milestones. So what this enables you to do is have scripts that create an automatic recording or a snapshot of a player's action when they do a certain event. For instance, imagine if you had a player reach the end of your level where they find a chest with treasure and you want them to be able to replay this moment and celebrate this moment. Instant replays will enable you to record and capture that moment and for the player to be able to access that recording on their device. Frame budget boost is currently in early access, and its default setting will improve your FPS, but it can cause visual distortions. Some players have reported that having this on does cause nausea. So if there's a lot of movement in your games, a lot of turning, you may want to consider turning this off at the cost of performance. Spawn nearby will, as it says, allow players to spawn nearby to other players when joining the session, which is an interesting one. Basically, if you have a host and say they're further in the level compared to other players, when a new player joins the world, they will spawn on the host or the other players when they begin the level. Footsteps volume, minimum distance, and maximum distance are self-explanatory. Usually you don't need to change these things unless you're building something like a stealth game or you really don't want footsteps in your game. The final three here is hide actions buttons by default, and as described here, it will hide the action buttons for grabbables by default on mobile. This can be also overridden through the grabbable properties. But basically, when you grab things on mobile, it also gives you the options to just drop those things or throw those items, and we can hide those buttons by default here. Note that we can also disable those buttons on a per object basis, so you don't necessarily need to hide them all by default. Disabling dynamic level of depth toggles on avatar. So this allows you to opt out of the horizon optimizations by automatically adjusting the level of details for avatars. Again, you can enable this if you're working with a high player counts, but if you're on something like 4, possibly 8 players, you can probably keep this as is. Finally, you've got enabled max quality avatar, which enables advanced shading, increased texture resolution on avatars. Again, this goes back to how many players you want in your world. If it's a relatively small scale experience, then you probably don't, then you can probably enable max quality avatars. But if you've got more than, let's say, 8 players, then you might want to keep that off for performance. Great. Quite an exhaustive list of player settings here. Again, we'll go into them in more detail when they become relevant. Things such as custom player movements and instant replays, those sort of interesting things require a dedicated section and dedicated video to them. Right, next we've got is report a problem. If there's any issues that you have in the editor, you could raise a problem and it will go to Meta. You specify an issue or suggestion, a category for it, title, description, and the files. So this helps Meta use your feedback and improve the product, which is a desktop editor for all users. Right, next is track your reports. So if you raise an error, if you raise a report with Meta, you can track the progress here. World Insights will open a new tab in your browser and will show you insights about your world, such as the number of players in your world, the number of visits, how long they spend in the world, etc. We'll go over that again in more detail at a later video. And next we have the view documentation, which also opens a separate tab with the documentation. And here we have the release notes. Again, these change with every release, but it's good to see sort of what Metin is working on and the sort of things that are being added to the desktop editor. Then finally, we have Quit Desktop Editor. Note that this will not close your world instance if there are other people in the world. So if there are also editing with you, this will not close the instance. But I do recommend returning to Creation Home first before you quit out the desktop editor. It just seems like an easier or a nicer way to quit, but it's there if you need it. Great. So that is the main menu. Quite a lot to unpack there. But we will now move on to the next items. The tabs here are the creator tools. These provide a set of commonly used tools for building scenes and using assets. And each of these buttons or tabs provides a menu for different tool tabs that you can use for creating your world. So the first tab that we have in this top section here is the Build tab. When you expand it, you get access to shapes, gizmos, sounds, colliders, an empty object, a sub-level object, or the ability to launch My Horizon creations. If we go into shapes, the very first tab here, we get access to a lot of primitive, both hard surface and smooth shapes, and we can go ahead and drag and drop one of these shapes into the world. So this library or this tab provides you with, as you can imagine, a lot of random and interesting shapes. You can also have a look at the properties panel here. Because I have selected the item by clicking on it, or the object by clicking on it, we can see its properties, such as attributes, behaviors, gameplay tags, physics, navigation locomotion, and more. So what we can do is set the tint strength to 1, and maybe change the color on this object. And there we go. We've got a differently colored pyramid. So that's one way to go about building out your world with shapes. The next tab we've got is gizmos. We will cover gizmos in a separate video because there is a lot of functionality to unpack here with each of these gizmos. But just for this video, we can have a look at the text gizmo, which, as you can imagine, allows us to display text in the world. So if I enter the text field on the right and tap in my message, then press enter, we can see Hello World appears in our world. Note that currently, because I'm in free view or flying about, it actually appears slightly above, but we can go ahead and reset its position just to begin with. There we go. So we can zero it out and then move it slightly forward here on the axes. So there we go. That is the gizmos. A lot of things there. Sounds, as you can imagine, gives you access to a lot of different sounds from the meta library. It also has categories such as effects, background, and music, and you can also search for sounds such as hit or success. So we've got a balloon hit sound here, and then as we did with the shapes, we can drag and drop it into the world and preview it by pressing play. So this is a balloon hit sound. Next, we've got colliders, which allows you to create invisible colliders in your world. It also changes our view to collider views so you can see these colliders. This is not the default view, so if you accidentally placed our collider or intentionally placed the collider, note that your view changes to collider view. We can see that our previously blue pyramid is now orange or slightly more orange in color, and that is because we are in collider view. To change from collision or collider view, we can go here in the top right, which is the view mode, and bring it back to shaded. Or we can use the number keys to also switch between these modes. So we've got 1 for shaded, 2 for wireframe view, etc., etc. Right. So that is the colliders view. Next, we have an empty object. This is not a tab in itself. This simply gives you an empty object. This object can host scripts. We can attach scripts to this object, or simply hold a point that you want in world space. Say, for instance, I wanted to position my pyramid on this empty object. Well, I can go ahead and copy the position of this empty object by right-clicking the position. And then I can select my pyramid, right-click its position, and press paste. Now we have the pyramid atop the empty object, and the position is 1-to-1 because we copy and pasted the coordinates on the X, Y, and Z axes. So that's empty object. Again, they have a lot of uses when developing worlds, but on their own, they're absolutely harmless and, again, not visible to players. If we go ahead and look into sublevels is a whole different topic. It lets you stream other worlds into your world and dynamically load and unload their content. So technically you can have additional worlds subloaded into your world in a way. Right, and finally it's launched by Horizon Creations, which, as you can guess from the description, launches your Horizon Creations. And that is it for the build tab. Next, we've got systems. So systems covers a lot of things like quests, leaderboards, variable groups, and navigations. As you can imagine, quests, leaderboards all sort of fall into the same category. So you have the players do something where they can obtain either a position on a leaderboard or they unlock a quest or an achievement. Variable groups is an interesting one we'll go over in a separate video, and navigation will go into a lot more detail, which lets you add pathfinding logic into your world. Next, we've got scripts. At the moment, as it says here, we do not have any script in this world, but when we'll go into scripting, we will use this tab a lot more. On this tab, it's worth mentioning that you also have settings for specifying your default code editor here. Then the final tab, a new addition to the desktop editor, and I believe this is still being rolled out differently depending on your region, so you may not have access to it, is the generative AI, which lets you create 3D models, a skybox, texture, sound effects, ambient audio, or even scripts with the help of the Gen AI from Horizon Worlds. So quite a lot of interesting things, but as you can see here, it's still in beta, and not everyone might have access to it. Great, so that is the sort of top left section covered. This very rightmost thing, as it says here, is view available asset updates. At the moment, as you can see, there's no asset updates, but when we go into the hierarchy and creating assets, this is how you can propagate updates into your world, especially when you're working with several editors in the world, or, for instance, a 3D team. Right. It's worth going over this central section next. We've got the ability to enter preview mode, which basically allows you to control your character and play for your experience. Next, if you press escape, we can unlock our cursor and we can stop the world by going to the top. Or if we press escape twice, the world will automatically stop for us. Sorry, the world will not stop for us, but we will exit the preview mode or play mode and enter build mode, which is this sort of preview look. The triple drop down also gives us the preview configuration. So as I mentioned, if we enter the world, it will automatically start for us. You can see here auto start simulation on preview entry. So whenever we press this button, the world will automatically start. It will not automatically stop for us when we enter the build mode, the preview mode, where we can also enable that functionality here. Next we've got is the ability to preview the device that you're working with. So if you're developing for mobile or web or VR, you can specify your device here. We can also provide a UI zone overlay. So if you're working with UI For mobile, for instance, you can specify the device that you're developing for, fit the view into its viewport, and provide an overlay. It would kind of look like this quite a lot on the screen, but you know the safe areas that you'll be working with and where you can and shouldn't really put your UI elements. So yeah, very useful tab, but for now we'll set to none and disable the overlay. We also got some extra preview actions, such as the send preview build link to the Meta Horizon app, open the preview build in browser, and copying the preview build URLs bitwise to share the world with others using a link. So that is the top section covered. Next, we'll go into the hierarchy view. So as you might have seen when we added the pyramid and the text elements, they populated the hierarchy view. The hierarchy panel displays the list of objects in the current scene, such as 3D models and script components. Then when you add objects to your scene, they will appear in this hierarchy panel. We can also delete objects from this hierarchy panel. So if I no longer want to have Hello World, we can select it in the hierarchy and press delete. We can also select objects and lock them in place so we don't accidentally move them about. We can also unlock them and move their positions in the hierarchy. Again, we'll go into the hierarchy in a lot more detail in a separate video because there's a lot of things to cover there. Next up on the list, we have this little section here, which are the object tools. These enable you to manipulate objects within your scene, and these tools provide you the controls to select, move, rotate, and scale objects. So if we go over to the first little section here, is the select. This can also be accessed using the Q key. Next one is W key, but yes, you can switch between them using keys. But yeah, if we go to the first one and select, we can select objects in the scene by simply clicking on them in the viewport. The next little button here, or the tool, is the move button, also accessible using the W key. So with that, we can move our object on one of the axes, or even all of the axes. Next up, we have rotate with the E key, so we can rotate around the Y, the Z, or the X axes. We can also press Ctrl Z2 and do as you would with every other application if we don't like our changes. And then the fourth one is R for scale, so we can scale along an individual axis, or we can scale uniformly by focusing on this central little node here. Next up, we have, if we go back to the select button, we have the transformations in local and global space. So each object has its own local space, which would be sort of its orientation relevant. But we can also go into global space and we can see that its forward direction stays with the world forward direction as opposed to its local orientation. We can see here in the very right, when we covered the properties panel, the attribute at the moment, it's at 260 degrees on the y-axis, so we can zero it out. And now both global and local match. So you may want to consider this when moving objects about. Next is we have the transformation relative to the object's center, or pivot. So at the moment it's set to the pivot of the object. So if we rotate it, it would rotate around the pivot point. If we change it to the center, again, this object has the same center point, so it doesn't make a difference. But this will rotate around the object center. This becomes a lot more relevant when you're working with grouped objects or objects with a custom pivot offset. And that covers the sort of object tools. Next, we've got the snapping tools. So you can snap objects to specific increments in your world within the grid, angle, and scale. So these features make it more possible to be more precise and uniform when placing objects. So this, for instance, is the grid snap. We can toggle it on and off by simply clicking on the button. Or if we have an object selected, we can also hold down the control key to force the movement to snap on the grid using the specified units. We can also reduce the unit resolution, increase the resolution, I should say, to say, for instance, quarter movements So now we move 0.25 units on the grid if we hold control. We can also increase this to something like 10 units, for instance, and now each move that we make is going to be 10 units apart from the starting position. Same goes for the rotation snap angles. By default, this is off, so when we rotate freely, but if we hold control or toggle this on and off, we will now rotate in 10-degree angles. And again, just like with the position, we could specify custom angles such as 45 degrees if we need to. But let's reset that back to normal. And obviously, just like with the other two, we can also control snapping on the scale. So if you need a more specific scale, say 50%, so each change will increase or decrease the object by 50%. We can do that as well. Here, we've got relative or absolute. This is snapping to the value that's absolute or relative to an object's position. Again, it's similar to pivoting and rotating. But yeah. Finally, we also got the ability to snap the object to surfaces. So this is especially useful when you're trying to align it to a particular object or world. And that sort of covers the tools or section that we have here. Next up on the top section here is the camera. So holding right click allows you to rotate your camera in the viewport. Using the WASD keys allows you to move around freely in the viewport. So if you combine the two, you can go to any position that you like. If you hold shift, it will also double your movement speed. And whilst holding control, you can also scroll up or down to control the camera speed. This camera speed can also be moved here. So if I change it to something like 10 units, we'll be moving 10 units. And if I lower it down to the 0.1, this gives us a very precise, very slow and methodical movement. This is especially useful when you're working with sort of smaller scale items like this. I mean, this is probably too small, but you get the idea. And as we covered before, the final section here controls the view mode. So if I set the scale of this and say populate the scene with a few more, make not 10 units, populate the scene with a few more pyramids, I will go through the views. So that this is the default view, the shaded view. 2 will bring us to wireframe view, so we can see the wireframes of these objects. Number 3 will give you a solid wireframe. Note that this is not the player, this is a spawn point gizmo. So obviously this will not have a solid mesh for a wireframe to render. Gizmos by default don't really have a wire mesh that is rendered. Next up we have the shaded wireframe. So it combines the two shaded and wireframe views. 5 we've covered before is the collision view, useful when you're creating invisible colliders. And 6 is the overdraw. So when your objects overlap, it will show you the overdraw that they incur. So I put these two objects one behind the other and go to overdraw. We can see that here we've got an overdraw of the two objects, one being drawn atop the other. And the final option lets us toggle gizmos. And so like I mentioned, the spawn point is a gizmo which comes from this gizmos tab, and we can toggle their visibility using this little toggle. And that sort of covers the big section. Right. If we move on to the bottom section, we can see the asset library, which has a collection of public assets created by other members of Horizon. We can also filter by creator, having official Meta Horizon assets here. We can clear, we can filter by newest or the type, such as food or toys or interactive. It's a nice place to get ready-made assets if you want to start off here. So to drop these into your world, you can simply drag and drop. So I'll drag and drop the NPC zombie from Meta Horizon. We can see it spawns in or is added to the world as a Unity asset bundle, which we'll go over in a different video, but that's what it looks like. My assets, where you can access your own assets that you possibly shared with the public or haven't shared. They're also categorized into folders. By default, all of them will go under My Assets, but you can create custom folders here by using the web editor or going through and adding them here. So there you go, folder, a folder, right? So it should categorize assets into folders. I do recommend starting this early on and making it a good habit. You've also got shared with me, is if you're collaborating with other members, they can share assets with you. You can also share folders with other individuals. So if you're working on a collaborative project, that's one way to go about sharing assets and models with each other. Next up, we've got the console. So here we've got all of the messages that would print out any errors, warnings, or just information that you might want to log to the console. And finally, we've got performance tab. It's usually empty unless you record the trace and then open the trace through here. So yeah, traces basically show you the performance of your world and any points that you may need addressing. Right, that covers a lot of sections here. Let's move on to the very top right. Here we can see that our world automatically saves every few minutes, I should say, but I can also force a manual save. If we save a backup, for instance, that will always force a save. We can also return to the creation home, which will hopefully save the state of our world. Here we can toggle the world simulation. World simulation basically means if we have objects with physics and scripts and things like that, by default, the world is stopped and paused. There is nothing happening. So if I set this to interactive and physics, just to give these objects some physics, and then I enable the world simulation, we can see that once the simulation starts, there is physics things happening. And if I had scripts on these objects or any other objects, this is when the scripts would begin running. So we can toggle world simulation on and off. It's worth mentioning that if you are in the world with other players, the world simulation will start for it starts the world simulation for the entire server instance that you are in. Right next to that, we've got the ability to reset world simulation, which is another way of sort of toggling it on and off, but it's a quicker restart. Then we've got yourself here and your collaborators. We'll go over the collaborators in another video, but this lets you invite your friends or other individuals that you want to work with in this world. Then we've got the microphone controls. You can mute and unmute your microphone in the editor. This is not in game. That would be a separate microphone. Here we can switch to VR. If you have your VR connected using USB to the computer, then you can switch to VR view and debug the DVDs. And finally, we've got the Publish World button, which again can be accessed through the main menu, Publish World. It's the same sort of thing. And that's it. That is a lengthy video, but we've covered the entirety of the desktop editor in one way or another. But again, we will cover a lot more of these things, details in the following videos. Great.